informal, and most of the time people have a lot to add, which I'm always really excited to hear. Actually, one of the things I might ask is it looks like the co-hosts are Judy Mosley and Elaine Sandy. Is that true?
Yes.
If either of you will be here, what I tend to do, what I found works best is I say, listen, stop me at any time for a question, but I keep most people muted, although you can decide not to do that, or do what works best for your group. But that way, if somebody has a question, they can type it in the chat. And I just need help keeping an eye on the chat because it turns out I cannot talk and read at the same time. I have tried and it does not go
Keep
well.
my eye on the chat. I know that Judy will be leaving in a little bit.
Okay, great.
And I can also unmute people if they can't figure it out for themselves, so that's fine. I have not been a co-host before, but I've been on enough Zooms, so I think I can handle it, and I know how to keep the chat open, so I can do that as well. And it looks like most of the gals who have signed on right now are veterans, Zoom veterans, so they know to keep their dogs and children at bay. All right, I see that Judy Mosley is recording this, so that if Debbie really can, I can't reach her, she's not answering. So if she can't get on, I'll go ahead and she can go ahead and watch it at another time. So if Debbie Levine will go ahead and introduce her friend, that would be wonderful.
Yay. Well, hello, good evening, everyone. This fall, when we started talking about bringing Javi to Providence as part of her book tour for her new book, we imagined it would be a face-to-face in-person event in Elaine's living room with treats baked by Bob, but we were not able to do that for obvious reasons, and I'm so glad that we found some way to get together so that you all can hear from one of my really most thoughtful, most brilliant, fantastic writer, really good doctor, friends, and also so that Javi could meet all of these wonderful, smart, thoughtful, really good doctors and writers and thinkers and friends from Temple Bethel. So here's Javi's short bio, that is her official bio. So Javi Eve Karkowski, MD, is a maternal fetal medicine physician working in New York City. Her writing has been published in Slate, The Daily Beast, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post. And I think I will leave it at that just to give us time to talk about Javi's work.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I do feel like I must also admit that I had the good judgment to marry one of Debbie's best friend's brothers, which just, good job me. It's not in my formal biography, but really was a smart decision overall.
I think good job, Josh.
Good job, Josh, also, but like if you have to be married to someone and then be in an unexpected pandemic with 4 children, I really would vote for him. All right, so let me get started. I really sort of put this together as a mishmash of a bunch of talks that I've done, and I think we can hopefully take it wherever is comfortable or interesting for you. There's a whole bunch of things we could talk about. So I usually just start by explaining who I am. You guys sound like you're a pretty medical community and very savvy, but let me just start with that. I'm a high-risk OB doctor. I joke that I'm like an oncologist. I'm the kind of doctor most people never, ever want to have. The term for us within our division is called maternal fetal medicine. And that's because I take care of women who have high-risk conditions in pregnancy, but also fetuses. I trained in diagnostic ultrasound. So for those of you who have been with somebody through a pregnancy recently, when you get that big 20-week ultrasound, sometimes that's when you find out the sex of the baby. That's usually overseen by someone like me, but it's also the first physical exam for that fetus, and often where we discover a lot of really complicated things. So that's my maternal and my fetal part. The other way where someone is called a perinatologist. As Debbie mentioned, I'm also a writer. I've written for The Atlantic and a lot of other places. I mentioned The Atlantic because my piece there is most relevant to what we're going to talk about tonight, which is my work in Israel. And also for the last 3 months, I've been pretty single-mindedly on the front lines of COVID-19 response in New York City, which has been exhausting, but a lot of people have wanted to know what that's like. So if there's any interest, I'm happy to share my experiences. It has definitely been a journey. We're not quite done, as nobody is. And those are the pictures of my book. There's two covers because there's a US cover and a UK cover. Both of them, I think, are a little dramatic and a little ominous. So sometimes to explain what I do, I actually just gave this lecture to the med students because they don't really understand. This is going to be the only racy part of this presentation. It's not very racy. But when I was in 7th grade, if you went to a Chinese restaurant and you got a fortune cookie, and if that fortune was something really boring, like you will find a new friend, right? Then you, as a 7th grader, would add something to make it a little spicier. You might add the phrase "in bed," because you will find a new friend in bed is infinitely more interesting and definitely way more hilarious to a 12-year-old. So my analogy is that my job is kind of like that universal phrase in medicine. So no matter how many times you've dealt with an asthma attack or an appendicitis, or even just a common cold, as soon as the patient is pregnant, most providers in the room, their heart rate will go up a little bit. Some of them will get some more gray hairs, but that's what I do every day. And so I sometimes say that I have the best job in the world, except on the days when I have the worst job in the world. And sometimes they're the same day. The other thing I say about my work, because I think people don't remember this, even people in medicine don't remember this, is that women's health is human health and human health is women's health. And I may have stolen that from Hillary Clinton, but it is nonetheless something I live every day. And so one of the ways I talk about this is that when COVID-19 started, my next door neighbor was like, "Oh, I don't know why you're so worried. You work in OB. You're gonna be on the wrong side of the hospital. You'll be fine," right? And I just looked at her because I could not even figure out how to tell her how wrong she was. I don't work on the wrong side of the hospital. Anything that's happening to people is happening to women. Anything that's happening to women is pretty much happening to pregnant women. And so if there's coronavirus in New York City, then I will be taking care of pregnant women with coronavirus. And in fact, for most of the last 3 months, I've been very busy inventing what the care of the pregnant COVID-19 patient looks like because nobody knew. So today that I was safe because her vision of labor and delivery has more to do with a diaper commercial is also to really miss what people might need and to not advocate for people who need a tremendous amount of thought in order to take care of them well. And the other example I give, and part of why I wrote this book, is because a lot of times women's health is sort of segregated. And I don't know if you feel like this is true. I think it's true even for non-pregnant care, but it's very true for pregnant care. When I was a med student in a famous hospital in Boston, oh no, I wasn't, this was in New York, sorry, in a slightly less famous hospital in New York, I was on labor and delivery, and this doesn't happen very often, thankfully, but it did happen. A pregnant woman, her heart stopped. Her heart stopped. And so we called a code. And a code in the hospital is sort of like putting up a bat signal, like we need help, right? And the code went out, respiratory or cardiac arrest code, labor and delivery. And for 1 minute, nobody came. For 2 minutes, nobody came. And for the 3rd minute, nobody came. And do you know why nobody came? First, because the code went out, cardiac arrest code and labor and delivery, and nobody in the team knew where labor and delivery was. Not one of them knew. Not one of them had been oriented there or taken the time to look at the signs. So that was the first problem. When they figured it out, they came to labor and delivery and none of their IDs would let them in because of course we had an alarm system that locked and didn't open except for people who worked on labor and delivery because we didn't want anyone to steal a baby. And it's very important. I do not want anyone to steal a baby, but the whole system neglected to think that at some point one of those women might need help from the larger hospital and that we should make that accessible. And so for 1 minute, and then for 2 minutes, and then for 3 minutes, while we started chest compressions and did all the right things, but could not believe we were alone, they banged on the door to labor and delivery until somebody heard them and sent the med student to let them in. And that's an example of the ways that if we segregate a particular kind of healthcare, we often really, really create a detrimental experience for that, and an unsafe experience for that population, even if we're doing it in an effort to protect them. So these are my pictures. This is my sweet husband who's right outside putting the kids to bed, and those are my 4 sweethearts / monsters who are managing okay. Together we are the Green Car family, or Mishpachat Green Car. And my sister-in-law made that with her 3D printer, Debbie. That's Nomi or Matt. And you guys specifically asked me to come and talk to you because aside from all the other stuff I do, we had the opportunity to spend the years 2017 through 2019 in Israel. So my husband had the opportunity to get transferred anywhere in the world, and they asked us if we wanted to go to Belgium, and I said I did not want to go to Belgium, thank you very much. I wanted to go somewhere where I had family and spoke the language, and my Hebrew was not terrible, and I wanted my kids to learn, and we had lots and lots of families, so we convinced them that we needed to go to Tel Aviv, and we packed up in June 2017, and I basically took a leave of absence from my job, tried to sell a book, and we flew off to Tel Aviv. And for the first several months, I just got my kids settled in school and made sure they were okay and dealt with bureaucracy. And we're not going to talk about the bureaucracy by which it was impossible for me to get a medical license because it was very stupid and boring to live through, and you should not have to hear about it. But ultimately, I ended up working on the hospital I was able to make an arrangement with was a tiny little ultra-Orthodox hospital in the north, whose name I will not mention because I haven't gotten their permission, but it was a unexpected place for me to work. And so I think what you guys had asked me to talk about a little bit was how religion works in that hospital and how it's different. So I sometimes start by talking about how I tend to use religion anyway a lot because, you know, I do work with pregnant women in all sorts of situations, some of them unimaginable, pregnancy loss, preterm labor, babies that might not live. And there's often the need for counseling that acknowledges that what we're doing here today is a medical event, but also a life cycle event, right? And sometimes the way to bridge the gap, or sometimes to even say, all the choices I have for you today are terrible ones, which is unfortunately a truth, is to use religious language, right? There's something about talking about withdrawing care from a new baby that's very hard to have. But if you can use it with the language of prayer, there's a way to establish that you're still on that family's team that I found really powerful. But there are limits. So one of the first stories, well, actually, I want to tell you a story if you have interest from last night, where it made me just love where I work. I work in some of the most diverse populations of the Bronx. And last night, I was on call, so I'm very tired still. And there was a patient, she, with her first baby, had labored and gotten to fully dilated and pushed for 2 hours and ended up with a really complicated C-section. I was really upset. And this pregnancy, she wanted to be different. She wanted to have a natural vaginal delivery if she could. So she got to fully dilated and she was pushing for 2 hours, and it did not look like it was going to happen. It looked like history was repeating itself. And then I wasn't even her doctor. I heard a hubbub from the room, so I ran in because I was more senior. I was going to help. I was anticipating problems, and she delivered. And her husband, who was wearing this giant skull cap down to here, gave his wife this resounding kiss on her forehead, went over to the corner, and started to I think the only word for it is to sing. He started to sing. And the only word that I understood what he was singing was Allah, Allah, Allah. And it was so clearly a prayer of thanksgiving, right? He sang for a good 5 minutes at the corner of the room at the sky, Allah, Allah, Allah. And my anesthesia team came running in because they were sure something terrible was happening. Is everyone okay? I was like, everyone's actually wonderful, right? And he finished his prayer to Allah, and he came over and he wrapped himself around his new baby daughter and his wife, and I have the best job in the world. I will never be able to talk with this man in his own language, right? He's a recent immigrant, but I absolutely understood perfectly, and so did everybody in that room, what he was saying. And I think that that's very powerful. Sometimes it creates problems. One of my first pieces for Slate was about taking care of a Jehovah's Witness patient. So Jehovah's Witness patients, as many of you may know, are not supposed to accept blood transfusions. And the work I do is sort of inherently full of blood loss, right? Even a healthy delivery has some blood loss. And she had a complicated pregnancy where it was very clear that she may actually hemorrhage during her delivery and might die if we could not give her blood. And this was intolerable to me. I couldn't imagine making such a decision. I couldn't imagine, coming from a Jewish background, that my religion would ask that of me. That's so counter to what I think Judaism teaches us from the very beginning. And I had this great idea. I had this idea where she would sort of sign over, just like I would be her proxy, just for this one decision, just for blood transfusion decisions. And then she would go off to sleep for her cesarean, but I would be awake. And while she was asleep, I would make the decision that it was okay to transfuse her. And she would still go to heaven because she would not have made this decision. And I was already going to hell, so it's fine. And she would live and get to parent her child. And I would be her Shabbos goy. But I would be her Shabbos goy. I would be her blood transfusion Jew. This was my very Talmudic solution. And I went to her with this solution. I was like, listen, I got this. I figured it out. We're going to make this better. And I talked to her and I talked to her husband. I even talked to their pastor from their church. And they just looked at me because I come from a tradition where you fight and you argue and you twist because you will do that all in the service of saving a life. And all that arguing is absolutely holy. And they come from a tradition where if this is what God asks of you, you just do it. And finding a way out of it was not relevant. I was solving a problem that they did not think they had. And it was very hard. I had to accept that even if I sort of understood their religion, I did not understand their culture. And that my blood transfusion Jew was never going to take off. And I had not, in fact, solved her problem because she felt that it was the grace of God to accept this decision. So let me take that to Tel Aviv. So in Israel, working is just so different for me. Oh, is there any questions? I'm sorry, I've been going on for a while. Any questions? Are you all asleep? Do you want to throw something in the chat? Debbie's happy, but that's not fair. She's my
No,
friend.
it was asked and answered. Cheryl wanted to ask about their high-risk fetal meds in New York during the COVID, and she said that you answered it without her even hearing her question.
Oh my goodness, and I can talk more about that because I will admit that it's all I live, think, and breathe for the last few months. I'm on day 96. No, I'm on day 94 of our COVID response schedule, and we're coming off of it in 2 more days, and it's like not 100% clear I'm going to make it. What happened to which woman I was just talking about? The CPR woman, or the lady who coded was fine. The lady, the Jehovah's Witness, we ended up delivering her very early so that we could minimize her. So we sacrificed a little bit of more prematurity for her baby because of the choices she was making, but she was fine. But sometimes with my stories, you don't always get to know what happened, which is very frustrating. I say this in the introduction to my book. People get really angry when I can't tell them what happened, but that's actually how my life is. I don't always get to find out. Like people disappear, or I disappear. And I think that's actually part of the issue is you sort of have to make these huge decisions and play your role, and you don't always get to know how it's going to end, which is really hard for me too. Anyway. Going back to Israel, a lot of it was different for me in Israel. Actually has less to do with the fact that Israel and America are different than from the fact that I'm used to working in gigantic medical academic centers with tons of residents and medical students and scientific research. And the hospital I worked at in Israel was a tiny community hospital. We literally rolled people across the parking lot if they had to go to the ICU, which you can do in Israel because it never really rains except for wintertime, but is still kind of like a very loony thing to do for an American doctor. It was a tiny hospital, and it was settled and started by a Haredi community. So it's an ultra-Orthodox hospital, but it is also the only hospital in its medium-sized beach town. So it'd be mostly ultra-Orthodox women and tons of signs everywhere about dressing modestly. And then like every so often, a lady would wander in off the beach needing stitches in her hand in a bikini, because Israel is full of like sublime and ridiculous things like that, which I frankly just enjoy the heck out of. So the first thing that was really different was that everyone has insurance. This is not entirely true. If you're an undocumented worker in Israel, you won't have insurance, but you don't have to do anything to have insurance besides legally reside in the country. You get full insurance for all your needs. I don't mean it's easy to navigate. I don't mean that everybody's insurance is the same, because I learned as a parent there's all these like semi-private, private things you can pay extra for. But the fact that nobody could not afford their insulin, which is a frequent occurrence for me in this country, was an amazing gift. So just that will radicalize, I think, many doctors. Just experiencing that as a baseline right is a beautiful, beautiful thing. In Israel, almost all deliveries are done by midwives, and I have worked a lot with midwives in the US. I actually worked at Mount Auburn Hospital in Cambridge for a while. Does anyone know it? It's not too far from you guys. And they have the most fantastic midwifery program there. I adore them. They taught me so much. I was a new attending, and they taught me so much. And they have the best acronym because it's Mount Auburn Midwives Association, so their acronym is MAMA. And midwives in Israel, it's so interesting because what we think of as sort of the most complex part, the part that you might need a doctor for, is delivery. And the midwives in Israel do not have the same training as midwives in America. Midwives in America are phenomenally well trained, independent providers who've done a tremendous amount of practical work. And by the time they're delivering babies are just really independent. My mama midwives only called me when a patient needed an operative delivery or a C-section. They really just didn't need me for much else way back then. Midwives in Israel attend almost every delivery, but do not have the training. They are basically a nurse, and the nursing degree in Israel is a much less critically thinking oriented one. It's a much quicker degree. And then they do a 9-month course to become a midwife, and that's it. So they don't have comfort with some of, like, they wouldn't be able to diagnose preeclampsia. They can't write orders. They just do uncomplicated deliveries. They can't sew up a laceration. There's all sorts of weird things they can't do. This was actually just really weird for me. So I finally ended up starting to think of them as just really nice labor and delivery nurses who just would not call me for the delivery. They just, that's just how they were much more like in fact, some ways much less well-qualified nurses than the ones I work with in America, who have a tremendous amount of experience with critical care and who I deeply rely on. But there are a lot of uncomplicated deliveries that are attended by midwives. One of the really interesting things about midwives is that it's one of the rare career paths that a Haredi woman can pursue. So a Haredi woman might be attended by a Haredi midwife. She might also be attended by a heavily tattooed Tel Aviv midwife who just came back from a Buddhist retreat. You just never know. So I love that too. And then I also want to mention, I didn't have any midwives from the Palestinian Israeli community, but a lot of my residents were Palestinian Israelis, and a lot of my residents were actually Palestinian Israeli women. And that is just super cool. And we're going to talk about that in a little while. The care in Israel is overall very, very, very good and very, modern, and they are very proud of the care they give. And the staff, and I think this is true of almost every hospital I've worked in, maybe other people who are in medicine can talk about that too, is just there's something about the concreteness of medicine. I don't think it's always fair. There's not always fairness. All the chairs are generally white men, and that's still true in Israel. But I will say that in my hospital, wherever I've worked, has been more diversity of religion, race, creed, and gender than I've ever met outside of the hospital. And that actually remained true in Israel. There was a time where, what was it? I was trying to teach the residents how to properly measure a fetal head on ultrasound. And what did I say? I said a word for skull, but I was wrong. I used the word for scalp. Like, I made a very fine mistake. And I was corrected by the resident who had just moved from Ukraine and was learning Hebrew. She was only 6 months in. I was corrected by the Palestinian Israeli man who spoke fantastic but very academic Hebrew because he had learned it in school the way that you would learn French. I was corrected by the Russian woman who had grown up here but still had a heavy accent. And the only person who didn't correct me was the native Hebrew speaker who just sat in the back laughing. Right? So I felt like it was the most Israeli moment because absolutely every single person in there thought they were 100% right. And what's more Israeli than that? But I also love that it was a diverse staff. They would make fun of me a lot because, so for example, the surgical techs were often Ukrainian or Russian, and I'm used to calling all the clamps I asked for by the names that I learned, but they use like ours are all named after American doctors, and theirs they use the European doctor was named after. So they would just make fun of me because I would call it like, I would ask for a Kelly. They don't know what a Kelly is. So eventually I just learned the word for clamp, and I would just be like, Nuli pa'an. Pa'an just means clamp, and they would just give me the right thing. I would just leave myself entirely in their hands. Some of the things were the same. A koker clamp is a kocher. So some of the things were the same. But I loved watching how these things play out, these very gentle ways of living together that you won't always see anywhere else. But I guess there's something to be said about watching a settler woman from an extreme right-wing settlement come in for pregnancy care, get cared for by a Palestinian-Israeli male resident and a secular Israeli nurse. And it just happens. And nobody talks about it and nobody mentions how hard it was. And maybe we'll have to talk about it one day to get to a better place, but there's also something really beautiful about how it just works sometimes. And you would never imagine that it could. I can talk more. I have some stories. I don't know if you guys want, I have something I presented at some point that I can read to you. You guys have the patience for that? Is that something you'd enjoy? Okay. So this is the story of Aya. Everywhere I've worked, the hospital has been a place where different people from different backgrounds work together. I don't want to excuse the discrimination and the terrible problems that I see both in the US and in Israel, but thankfully the diversity is the same in the hospital. The hospital is full of Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis, Haredi midwives and Muslim doctors, and Tel Aviv nurse managers with their arms full of tattoos on the return from Buddhist retreats. All of us working together because that's what taking care of the human body entails. One of the women who works in my clinic is a lovely Muslim woman in her 20s. Let's call her Aya. I think she's a nursing assistant. Sometimes she does blood draws. She won my heart forever when she, unasked, brought me a cup of hot tea while I was getting over a cough. In all my years at an American hospital, nobody has ever bought me a cup of tea, just so you know. Aya is young and relatively secular. She does not wear a hijab. She speaks beautiful Hebrew, but she told me that if you're going to fight with your husband, you should really do it in Arabic because it's more expressive. Aya mostly works with the clinic manager, who we'll call Rivka. Rivka is a Haredi midwife. She's very experienced and in her 60s, and Rivka is formidable. I'm not sure how many of her own children she has, but it is definitely at least in the low double digits. Rivka has the ramrod posture of a general, and she scolds me when I spend too much time with a patient, which is how I know she likes me, because if she didn't like me, I'd just be gone. So we have Aya and we have Rivka working together all day, every day. Rivka is the boss of the clinic, so she's the boss of Aya. They aren't friendly, but they're civil. During my first week of work, Aya told me that she was pregnant. It was her first pregnancy, and she had some questions. A week or so later, she asked me if I could check on the fetal heartbeat. I told her I'd be happy to do that one of the hard parts of working in women's health is that you see all the terrible stuff. But one of the good parts is that you can always ask for an ultrasound. That day, we did a quick look, and we saw a fetus bouncing about with a quick little flicker of the heartbeat. 2 weeks later, as we were finishing up our work on a Thursday afternoon before the weekend, she asked me if we could check again. I'm going away for a few days, she said, for my birthday. I'm 12 weeks pregnant now, she said. I want to enjoy the weekend and not worry. Do you mind checking? Of course, I said. My birthday present to you, I said. You can probably see where this is going. I put the ultrasound probe on her belly. No flicker. No movement. I didn't want to see what I was seeing, so I spent some time looking, trying to find any signs of life. Aya was looking over at the screen, and she had to be the one to say it because I didn't want it to be true. I will feel terrible for a long time that she had to be the one to say, there's no heartbeat. Stop looking. The pregnancy was not alive anymore. Aya sat up on the ultrasound bench. She pulled out her phone and her hands were shaking, trying to call her husband. Then she was speaking to him or to her mother. She was sobbing with fast-paced Arabic, turning to face the wall. And here comes a knock on the door. Rak Rega, just a minute, I say in a strained voice. We need 5 minutes, 5 dakot. Rivka bustles in. What are you doing slowing down my clinic today? We have still more patients to see. Aya, I need you to draw blood in room 2. I try to intercept Rivka before she comes to the door, but I'm too slow. And in any case, Rivka has never been prevented from going anywhere she wants to go. I look over at Aya in Hebrew. She says, you can tell her. I take Rivka out by the elbow to the hallway. I am ready to argue with her because I am ready for tough Rivka to sigh and try to get Aya to finish her shift. She's not sick, I'm ready for Rivka to say. There's no physical reason she cannot work. Physically, she's the same as she was 10 minutes ago. That all technically may be true, but it is so many kinds of wrong that I will not stand for it. I've got my heart rate up and I've got my best fake Israeli chutzpah on simmer and I am ready to fight. Out in the hall, I say to Rivka, did you know that Aya was pregnant? She nods. I take a breath, I say, Aya asked me to check the pregnancy with the ultrasound. There's no dofek, there's no heartbeat. Rivka takes a step back. Suddenly her whole body sags, she crumples, she puts her head down on between her outstretched arms, Elohim lo, I hear her say, lo, 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 Aya metuka. Dear God, no, no, sweet Aya. And now, of course, I'm crying because, of course, Rivka, of course, you recognize this grief. And of course, Aya is not them, not Muslim, not secular, not a subordinate. No, she's your patient. She's your daughter. She's us. She's you. I never should have doubted you, that you would know that. This tragedy, you know this common tragedy, and you recognize the woman going through it. After a moment, Rivka gathers herself up, and then Rivka makes everything magically go away because she's Rivka. I bundle Aya off to a private space and reach her doctor. I wait with her until her husband and mother come. I watch them walk away to her car, to her birthday weekend. And now I'm going to tell you what I think is going to happen next. In 2 weeks, we'll all be back at work in the clinic, me, Rivka, Aya. Everything will be exactly the same, I think, except at around 10 a.m., Rivka will make Aya sit down, and without a word, she will put in front of her a cup of hot tea. And this is what in the end will save us all. Sorry, I should have warned you that there was pregnancy loss. I usually warn people. I have the best job in the world, even when it's the worst job in the world. I do think it is what saves us all, right? In the end, there's some universal things that we can all recognize. The last few things I wanted to mention were just that a lot of my patients in Israel came to my hospital because it was an ultra-Orthodox hospital. We got a ton of women who drove past some very excellent academic institutions in Tel Aviv and the suburbs because we were known as a place that would not do a cesarean section easily. And that was largely because the Haredi population we served often felt very strongly about having 10 or 12 or 14 babies, which is very, very hard to do if you're going to have 1 million cesareans. And so there was a higher acceptance of certain kinds of risk in order to avoid a cesarean. And women from all over Israel who did not share the culture in any other way, but really valued that, would drive to us for hours and hours and hours. There was also a real rejection of prenatal diagnosis by the Haredi women. This is actually very different. Most of Israel really, really, really does a ton of prenatal diagnosis to the point that I, as a provider, was very uncomfortable. I actually wrote, that's what my article for The Atlantic was about. If you ever want to read it, I am sort of the, if anyone wants to know all about Israeli abortion law, I feel like I'm the secret least known scholar on comparison between Israeli and American abortion law, because it turns out that abortion law, like Roe v. Wade, sort of secretly underpins most of obstetric care. And so therefore in Israel, most of obstetric care was just so foreign and strange to me. You can have a termination of pregnancy in Israel. You can never decide on it yourself, not even if you're very early. It always needs to go through a committee of mostly men, which is appalling to me. But you can have that termination until the day you deliver, which is very, very strange for me. So I wrote that article, and I'd love anyone to read it and tell me what they think. It was a hard way to learn to practice, but it made me also understand why you might not want prenatal diagnosis, because the setting of the pursuit of the perfect child can be an exhausting one. It can be damaging to some of your values for these Haredi women. And the final thing that was very hard for me is that I am a pretty militantly pro-choice provider. I spend an enormous amount of time trying to give women autonomy over their bodies, trying to give them back sometimes what the system takes from them. Part of why I wrote the book is I think sometimes when we tell our stories, we gain power over our actual immediate medical activities, and that when we don't tell our stories, somebody else tells them for us most of the time. And so for me to walk into, it's storytelling, it's lay, you would love it. I mean, I think you would love it. It's a good book. It's a good little book. I'm very proud of it, even after all this time. It's absolutely for lay people. It's not for doctors. Although a lot of it does have pregnancy loss in it, so some people just feel less comfortable reading it if they are currently pregnant. Although I've also had people say that it has explained a lot to them about the things their doctors didn't say, but that their doctors did, which can really be very useful. But it's also got a lot in it about medical systems, which I think anybody, including men, sometimes appreciate. To go back to my Israeli hospital, almost every decision about their own body in this hospital, women would want to call the Rebbe. They would want to call the Admor. Admor is the acronym for Adonenu Morenu Rabbeinu, the leader of their particular Hasidic sect. And I actually was very worried about this when I went to work at this hospital, because I didn't know if I would be able to work at this hospital, which at that moment was my only option in Israel. I'd already been not working for 8 months, and it turns out to be not great for me not to work. It's a huge part of what I love and my identity. And I really did not like the idea of having to call some dude I had never met and who had no medical training to find out what would be allowed for a woman's body. A lot of stories about this, and it's not ever something I'm going to love. It's something I did come to respect as something that these women needed to feel comfortable. And since she chose to call him, I would respect that. But I will tell you about my first day when I walked into a patient who was 23 weeks gestation with ruptured membranes. So 23 weeks, as some of the pediatrician people are in the background, is what we call periviable. It's right at the limit where a baby may or may not be able to live if it's born. So it's a time of great and horrible decisions, you know. It's quite possible that no matter what we do, we will lose this pregnancy, and that we will end up with a fetus or a baby, depending on how you're telling this story, that dies, or that if it lives is really, really disabled with lifelong medical problems, right? It's a terrible, terrible time. But she also had her membranes broken, and I was worried she was going to get an infection. And this is scary to me because women have died from this. And so I walked in and I told her in my very, very broken Hebrew, I said to her, before we start to work together, there's one thing I need you to know. You are the most important person in this room. You are possibly the only important person in this room. So whatever else we do, whatever else we talk about in terms of your pregnancy or your baby, please know that we are not allowed to let anything happen to you. I said that to her, and she smiled, and she said, "B'diuk ma she'Admor amar." That's exactly what the Rebbe said. And I took a huge breath. Maybe I can work here. And I could work there. I never became the doctor that the Admor called. You know who the doctor that the Admor called for a second opinion was, by the way? He was a male Palestinian Israeli guy with no subspecialty training. And I will never know why, although he's an excellent surgeon. And when I asked my secretary, who was actually pretty high up in the Hasidic community, how I could become the guy that the Admor called, and she said, you cannot become the guy that the Admor calls. You might be able to be the woman who goes to have coffee with the Admor's wife, which is also very powerful. So I never explored this fully. I would need another few years, but I'm a little bit resentful that I cannot become the guy that the Admor calls, but I would like to see what happens if you go have coffee with the Admor's wife. Let's see. That's all I really prepared, but I'm so happy to take questions and just chat with you. Does anyone have anything they want to hear more about or talk? Oh, and this is my book. Hold on. I am very proud of it. And I think you would like it. My mother-in-law likes it, and that's not a trivial thing. Oh, you all have to unmute yourselves.
I wanted to say that this was, I'm verklempt. I know I'm having a big debate about how to pronounce that with Debbie Levine. It was very moving and informative and moving, which doesn't always go together. I really appreciate it.
I have to apologize. I usually warn people before I tell stories about pregnancy loss, and I just forgot. I'm so sorry.
We knew that from your description, and the title of your book was kind of a giveaway.
Okay.
I think that we have a reading circle, which is our book club, and we also discussed. We watched the film Unorthodox, and had a little bit of an idea about the relationships, although it was fantasized or fictional. But as far as having sex in the Orthodox, did you have any insight into how these babies were created? Is there a different style? Does that make a difference in the pregnancy?
I would say that, okay. I have a lot to say here. First of all, the husbands are generally very devoted to their wives. So I don't know, I can't tell you what it means about sex, but there's a lot of affection for many of them, which is something that I sort of did worry about. What is it like to live with that? But the other thing is that, okay, so nobody gave me a tour of my hospital. The first day was definitely under-orientated. That was the same day as that 23-week rupture of membranes. They really just threw me in there. And I actually had never understood. So almost all these women would labor with another woman. Often their mother would be there, like doula. There were a lot of volunteer doulas. Often their mother would be a doula, and while nursing her, like she'd be a doula for her oldest and nursing her 1-year-old, right? Because she has 15 babies, and so her oldest is 21 and having her first baby, and her youngest is 1. And that is just something that you wouldn't think of, but there it is, and it's perfectly lovely. And in fact, she's a very experienced doula in her own way. I have so many stories about just how that room can be different, but I will tell you the husband's not in the room. And after the baby's born, the husband will sometimes come in to see the baby and say some psalms, and then they go back out. And I always thought they were coming in from the bathroom. A door would open, and a man in a black jacket and a huge hat would come in. And I was like, okay, he must be in the bathroom, like waiting for the labor to be over. I don't know. And it took me, then I went my first labor where we called for pediatricians, and that same door flung open and pediatricians came in. I was like, that is not the bathroom. What is that? And I realized there was a whole hallway. It's a whole davening hallway. It's a hallway for prayer behind. So all of the labor rooms like face into the nursing station, which is not, the public is not allowed out there. And people like men or doulas are only allowed to enter from the door behind the bed. So it's very like modest. And that whole hallway is filled at all times of day and night with men saying psalms for their wives, right? And also it's the quickest way from the NICU. So it also is where the pediatricians come flying from. But I was like, I just feel like no other hospital I've ever worked at has like a davening hallway, but we have a davening hallway. It's kind of just like this crazy, I mean, even the architecture is different. You know what I mean? Anyway, there were parts of it that were very uncomfortable for me. Like, I don't know if I could ever have been the chair of the department there. That's painful. I don't really want to work somewhere that would make that decision based on my gender. I ended up not having to explore that because I was only there for like less than 2 years. So I both have my peace with them and really appreciate them, and I struggle. Sorry, Debbie, did you have your actual literal hand up, or was that a figurative hand up?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask the next question if no one already has their hand up.
Can I ask a question about something you said? When you said that you would never be the person that the Rebbe spoke to, I imagine that's because the gender difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that whole thing, I imagine, would pervade your ability to have authority in the hospital.
So interestingly, most of the hospital, it's a very interesting thing, most of the hospital is run by secular men and women, right? Because these Haredi Orthodox men and women, maybe a midwife, maybe every so often they'll take a job in like patient transport, but they're not going to go to medical school, right? Like that would be so much time away from Torah. So there's this strange acceptance, which I don't think is true in somewhere like Tel HaShomer or Ichilov, which are like sort of you have to enter the secular world to join them. There's 3 hospitals in Israel that are considered like part of the Haredi community. And in those, it's very interesting because all of the leadership is secular, basically, all of the medical leadership. And the secular medical leadership is actually very diverse. As I mentioned, like the head of infectious disease is a Palestinian man, and his wife was an OBGYN in the OBGYN department. And so there's some more acceptance there. But I will tell you this, ask how many women are heads of departments even at the secular hospitals, right? So it's not great anywhere. It's not great in the US either. It is probably more overt there. I don't know if there's a rule, in the hospital bylaws that a woman can't be presenting things. But like we had grand rounds from women all the time because that's within the medical part. You know what I mean? I was very respected because when you're American, it's like I have so much cachet, which means they tolerated really terrible Hebrew mistakes. Like for example, my Hebrew actually is pretty decent. And by the time I finished, I was great. But there was one time where I was talking to a woman who had diabetes, and I was trying to explain to her that her pancreas wasn't making enough insulin, so we needed to start insulin. And I kept talking about her klavlav, her pancreas, So the word for pancreas is lavlav, and klavlav is a puppy. Right. Nobody stopped me. Like 25 minutes of counseling. Nobody stopped me. Okay. afterwards, my lovely resident who grew up speaking Arabic was like, by the way, did you mean to say it? And I was like, no, and you need to stop me after the first time. Anyway, but they tolerate it's like having a British accent. They think you're at America, or you're American, it's fine.
Javi, I taught school in Aberdeen, Scotland, when my husband was on sabbatical. And the language, what you're saying was happening to me all the time. A little boy started shouting, I dropped my rubber, I dropped my rubber. And I took all of my strength not to go ahead and pursue. Found out a rubber was an eraser. So
thank God.
Thank
God.
I do know that you have to keep a smile when there's the language barrier.
Karen Eisenberg has some questions. Could I ever have a conversation about the use of birth control? Yeah, they are sometimes really open to birth control, especially after they've had a couple of children. And this is also where sometimes when you are sort of deeply embedded, like I will tell you, one of the secretaries who worked in the ultrasound unit, who I really like, she was kind of spicy and not at all somebody who seemed amenable. She wasn't at all somebody who was amenable to like someone telling her what to do. And it was funny because I had a conversation with her about she was like, oh, my friend Mickey, she is a tzaddikas. She is a really righteous woman. She asked the Admor everything. I decide what I'm going to ask the Admor because my husband always reminds me, if you ask the Admor, then you have to do what he says. And then sometimes I think maybe we'll just think about this ourselves. So there's always just like in every other system, there are ways to do it. And then in terms of, so for example, her daughter got married and she said to her, I'd love you to not have a baby for a couple of years. I think you should just enjoy being together. So I think that was a tacit sort of counseling of her daughter to have birth control. Her daughter was not willing. I think she really wanted to have her first baby, and whether that's partially being part of a community where that's the next thing, right? The same way that your daughter might look forward to going to college. And if you say to her, take a gap year, she may or may not want to, it's just, that's the future. And many young people want to get there as fast as they can. But definitely after the second or third or fourth baby, a lot of people are willing to take a break. And definitely if there's a medical reason, for sure, there's a lot of acceptance for pikuach nefesh, for saving a life. If someone is on their nth degree birth, does it happen fast? Sometimes, and sometimes not. There's a lot of stuff. There's this concept of a grand multip in medicine, which is somebody having their sixth or more than sixth baby. And I learned that there's a great grand multip, which is somebody having more than their 12th baby. So great grand multips, also a lot of times the uterine muscle just doesn't contract really well anymore. It's like it sounds like it's like just really tired. So anything can happen is the truth in obstetrics, and it is still true when you are having your 14th, 15th, 16th baby. Anything can happen. But I had to learn some new tricks. I had to learn different levels of tolerance. But I also feel like they loved me. They loved that I was a woman, that I loved that I would ask them what they wanted to do, which Israeli doctors don't always know how to do. I do a lot of shared decision-making with patients, and this was sort of new for them, and they loved it. And the midwives loved working with me, which, as you know, if you get your nurses or your midwives on your side, your life is just better. But also, it's such a funny place. Do you know that at 10 o'clock in the morning every day, all the orderlies would make a huge salad, and they'd bring up like this giant cheese blinza from the kitchen, and everybody would sit down together and have breakfast. It's like such a socialist little thing to do. I had never done it in America. It is so charming. I think everybody on every unit should have delicious, fresh breakfast at 10 a.m. It's just a good idea. I mean everybody, including me and the Palestinian Israeli residents and the Ukrainian orderly, and making salad was part of the orderly job description, which I think is funny. And anyway, I have so much to say about that. My mom thinks my next book needs to be about religion in Israel. I see some questions about taking care of women in COVID-19. Do you guys want a few minutes on that? We're almost at the end of our time. I have been taking care of pregnant women with COVID. This has been a really complicated experience. There's the pregnant women who have COVID pneumonia, which is women who are sick. But then there's the fact that we have to redesign the entire hospital, and we had to do it in like a couple of days to make everything safer for everybody else. So, other places had the ability to cancel all their office visits and all their surgeries, and for anyone who was healthy, and we could not, right? None of what we do is insensitive to time. So we had to redesign outpatient care because we still needed to provide prenatal care. And so I did a lot of inventing of telemedicine over the last 3 months. A lot of it is ugly and a lot of it didn't work, but we had to, move fast and break things, and we did. We also were just like constantly adjusting everything that we do, all of the hours that all of us work. We then go home and are like rewriting protocols of who gets PPE, who needs to wear an N95, who doesn't need to wear an N95. We just ran out of these masks. Okay, so we're gonna rewrite the protocol tonight. So there was just so much work. That's the meta work of running a system and the meta work of running a hospital and making decisions. When COVID started, I want to tell you 2 things. One is that my brother was supposed to get married on March 22nd. And it became clear about March 15th that we couldn't have the wedding as was planned. And they were talking and talking. Should we just have a different wedding? Should we cancel the wedding? And he called me. And I said to him, I love you so much. And I'll, whatever you tell me to do, I'll be there. Like, why are you talking to me? And he said, because I've heard you talk about your work. And most of what I think you say is that you sometimes have to take people through decisions where there's no good answer. And that's what we have. We don't want to be here. We don't want to be making this decision. All of our options are not what we want. And I think that that's what you do at work. And actually, that was like the best compliment he could have given me. They ended up getting married on Zoom. It was very, very beautiful. And we are going to have the biggest party whenever we can. And then the second thing is that someone said to me, I'm on a lot of Facebook groups of MFMs, and one of them was so wonderful. She was like, we're all talking remdesivir. Should we give to our patients? Should we not? A lot of our patients are excluded from trials. Who's delivering the decision whether to deliver a very sick pregnant patient with COVID, premature, not premature? These are all things that we're doing without any guidance. And my friend got up in Facebook, she put up a post. She said, people, you have spent your whole lives making life and death decisions with extremely limited scientific evidence. Who is better trained than you for this time in history? And I was like, she has a good point. So it has not been easy and it has not been fun. And parts of it have been very, very, very scary and sad. Parts of it are also very inspiring. I honestly thought very strongly in the beginning of taking my kids, running away and hiding in my mother's basement in suburbia. And I didn't. I went to work every day, partially because my partner could not imagine why I wouldn't go to work, since he thinks that what I do is very important, which is very beautiful. And partially because a lot of people that I work with who are older than me and who are sicker than me and who have a lot more at stake than me just said, well, this is what we do. We go take care of patients. And every day they put on their gear and they went to take care of patients. And how could I not? So every day that's what I've been doing. And every day so far I've woken up without a fever. Day 96. I can do a whole presentation on COVID. I actually have it, but I don't think I can do it for you today. But we can bring me back or talk another time.
Oh, Kaveh, this was absolutely wonderful. There was
I'm so
a comment
glad.
about thanking you for your personality as well as the information. The way you speak has got to reflect in your writing. So I'm very excited about reading your book.
Thank you.
You have to make it into a book on tape,
Oh, it's Audible. It's on Audible.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm an
I'm
Audible.
a little bit annoyed because I wanted to do the reading and my agent completely forgot. They hired some actress and she asked me how to pronounce my name, but she apparently pronounces a couple of things wrong, medical terms. But it is on Audible. She apparently does a decent job.
Oh, thank you. That's the only way I read anymore. So
You're not the only one.
So I can exercise as well. Anybody else? Let's go ahead and unmute if I can. I don't know how to.
I just feel like Max Garino is probably not really Max. Are you really Max, or is this the wrong name?
No, that's her. That's her.
I was wondering. Or it's Maxine. Or you can be Max. I'm not going to judge.
No, it's Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
I'm trying to unmute all, but it's not working.
I think I can do it. Hold on.
With the new Zoom, each person has to unmute themselves.
No, I think I just unmuted all of you. I think I did it. Except Debbie, I'm unmuting you.
Well, whoever wants to speak, come on. Just if you are muted, unmute yourself, because I have to unmute all and it's not
I
working.
think I did, but I think if you muted yourself also, I don't know. If you want, I can get my tech support, which is my 11-year-old. He's really good at this.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us, and it was really great, Javi.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I have to say, it was really, for the first 2 months after COVID started, I just sort of didn't think about my book. And then I realized it was sort of my small, now that my family seems to be okay and we're managing, it was like this small grief of this very large catastrophe. And so doing these events, which I've been doing a lot of actually, has been a really lovely thing for me. Plus, it's so nice to see people's faces, right? We did not appreciate it enough when we did it every day.
Debbie Barchet, is that you on, hon? Because I haven't been able to reach you. But
Can you hear me?
oh, good, Debbie. Well,
No, I did not have internet for the first 15 minutes of all times.
well, I wrote to you that
Crazy trying to connect. So yeah, but I heard pretty much all of it. So it was fantastic, Javi. It was great with all of our emails going back and forth.
Do I not get to see your face after all that? I feel like I've met
No,
you.
I know. Well, I don't know. You did at the
You don't
beginning.
have to, no pressure. It's
But I
okay.
think,
It is really nice.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Thanks.
Excellent.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Debbie. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
facilitating.
Thank you so much.
And I couldn't hang up. You hooked me in.
Oh, because she was so
I
interested.
yeah, I stayed on the
Take it
whole
as a
time.
compliment. You meant to go.
I thought maybe
All right.
technically
I'll
she
write you
would
a
know.
doc.
I just
Oh,
wanted to
it's
mention
wonderful.
my connection with Mount Auburn Hospital.
Hi, is that Barbara talking?
It is. I was a graduate student in social work living in Cambridge and had to have my wisdom teeth removed. And at that point, they did it inpatient. And that was my first experience ever being in a hospital. And they put me at Mount Auburn Hospital and I had my wisdom teeth removed. I think I stayed overnight. This was a long time ago.
I haven't worked there for 15 years.
Okay, well,
Two.
so I was probably 73, maybe 1973, maybe, and maybe even earlier, maybe 71. So definitely a good experience in that, they all came out and I didn't have any dry sockets or anything like that. That was my Mount Auburn experience.
So I haven't worked there in a long time. It's not where I work now, but it was very formative for me. It's actually also, where I was working. We lived in Cambridge for my residency and for the few years after residency, and I was pregnant with my first baby. Although I delivered I delivered at the Brigham because that's where I did residency.
Well, all good places.
Lots of options.
Thank you so much. I'm sure you're tired.
No, I am. I wanted to just mention, because I am trying to find my book its audience. If any of you has any book groups, or I don't know, if you are very promiscuously members of other sisterhoods, or if you in any way have friends who might want to have me come. I've been doing these and they're really, even when I don't have Debbie Barchet to set everything up for me, I set them up and they're very easy because I do them from the corner of my bedroom, occasionally with a unclad child running by. And so if you know of anybody who'd be interested, I've been really enjoying them. I do them most weeknights, so let me know. My website is javicar.com. If you want to send me, you can send me a little note there, or there are also links to buy the book. But I'd love if you think of anyone who might enjoy something like this, I'd love to do it again.
We'll publicize it with WRJ. And
when we start up our Torah pop-ups, we'll be in touch to schedule you for the temple-wide.
I'd love to do that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
My pleasure. We'll be in touch. We're gonna have a long relationship. All right. Thanks to Debbie for bringing me to your community. Bye,
Stay
guys.
healthy. Stay well.
I'm doing my very, very best.
Okay.
Yes, that we are.
Thanks again.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.